Welcome to Don't Fear the Weight podcast with your host Vicky Masita, bringing together science and personal experience.
Hi guys, welcome to the next episode of Don't Fear the Weight. I am your tiny titan host, Vicky Masita, as always. And today I have got one of my favourite guys from Instagram. He is an Instagram star. His name is Mr. Steve Hall from Revive Stronger. How are you doing, Steve?
I am doing really well, thank you. And yeah, thank you for an Instagram star, maybe in our little niche. Trying to get there, putting in the work. So yeah, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No worries, no worries. I think you can be classed as an Instagram star. You could be IG famous. You know, it's not like you said. It's just in our niche. But let's face it, even big names like Dana Lynn Bailey, nobody knows who she is outside of our niche. So
true.
We can get there one day. Anyway, right. So for people who don't know who Steve is, I'm going to hand it over to him so he can give himself a little bit of a background and tell you where he's come from and where he's at now in his career. Go ahead, Steve.
So I'll try and keep this as brief as possible because I feel like I've done this before on podcasts and I've gone on a big, long tangent, but I'll try and keep it brief. So right now, I am an online personal trainer. So everything I do is online. I don't do any in-person stuff. I haven't for the past 2 or so years. So yeah, love actually coaching people online, mostly bodybuilders, powerlifters, people who are interested in those sports is kind of where our audience lies. So that's really exciting. But a big part of my job as well, like yourself, is content production. So trying to provide free, valuable information to our audience. And hopefully, and it seems to be working, they then want like coaching or they want something from you that can provide us an income, which is fantastic. I do that with my company, Revive Stronger, which I have the podcast, a blog, Instagram, try and be active on Facebook and things like that. And I do that with Pascal Floor, who is the other coach at Revive Stronger. And I guess in short, I'm a natural bodybuilder, so I'm actually not as few weeks out as you. So I'm impressed that you're running podcasts and being on top of this sort of thing and seem really chirpy. But I'm 4 weeks out from my first show of this year. I competed back in 2014 as well, did a little bit of powerlifting. So hence why I coach those sort of people. It's where my interests lie. And the backstory of Revive Stronger very briefly is basically I had a bad accident. I recovered stronger out of it. And it kind of inspired me how amazing the human body is. If you kind of give it the right inputs, you get kind of really cool outputs and it can actually become an amazing thing. So yeah, that's kind of a quick summary of who I am, what I'm about, and what I hope to help people with.
What a lovely thing to do about having inspiration from an accident and getting out stronger from it. I love that. So, kudos to you. So, yeah, absolutely feeling your pain of the 4-week mark out. I am officially 6 days out.
6 days, so, wow.
Days. So I've got my diet face on point. And I've got like a little bit of a base layer tan going on because I was doing some posing practice yesterday, hence the reason why I'm a bit more glowy than normal. But yeah, I'm all good. So, okay, so there we are. There's Steve in a nutshell. So what we're going to do is we're just going to dive straight into the podcast today. One of the things that I really love Revive Stronger about and what I really follow Steve about is his periodization methods when it comes to coaching people. And that is what this podcast is going to be about today. So, Steve, why don't we just first of all start off with the training idea of periodization and just explain, obviously we know there are lots of different forms of periodization, but what is the kind of periodization that you particularly like and why first off in training?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So I think periodization for me, and I can kind of relate to a lot of probably the listeners who might be listening who aren't completely sure what periodization is, or they've heard of loads of different models and they've tried loads of different things like concurrent, daily undulating, linear, all of these different things. And for ages, I was reading textbooks. Practical Programming was one I loved by Mark Ripperton, and I must have read that like 3 times through. And still I was like, I don't really get it. Eventually, after you read them enough, and I read an article, I think it was on Juggernaut Training Systems website, where they were like, there is just only one type of periodization. There isn't all of these different other ways. They just all are really within one model, which is overall in a linear fashion. So it kind of has to be, because for progress, we need progressive overload. We need things to get harder over time. So there's going to be a linear increase in whether it might be volume, intensity. It will depend on maybe the phase of training. So a lot of the kind of like daily undulating periodization, for example, is actually a programming method more than a periodization method. So by that, I mean, it's like done on a weekly basis, kind of within the week. That's kind of tiny programming tweaks, whether it's undulating kind of reps, sets, intensity, or maybe even a movement, kind of that's a programming element. So your periodization is kind of just in simple terms, so people kind of can understand it, is just your plan. It's what you're doing over time. And it's a long-term vision. And the one I like, I think it's been called very different names. Again, periodization, people like textbooks like to confuse it by having different names for different things. So people might know it as kind of block periodization, modern periodization. I've heard it called sequential periodization as well. So they're all terms that basically talk about periods of time where you focus on one element at a time. So for bodybuilders and powerlifters, or people looking to kind of change their physique, that's generally strength and hypertrophy phases. And if you're a powerlifter, peaking phases. And that's kind of the model I really like to use. And then, using them in a way, so in a kind of sequential manner, so that each kind of period of time that you're doing builds upon towards the next. So they kind of bring around the net result that you want. So for a powerlifter, they want to get big muscles, then they want to make those big muscles really strong through a strength phase, and then they will peak that within a peaking phase. Whereas a bodybuilder, kind of, we're always just going for basically hypertrophy, but there becomes points at which, whether we're just too fatigued from all the training volume, we need to back off, we need to let things like resensitize so that we can then come out and we can use a strength phase, low volume phase, to then kind of prime ourselves for future periods of time. So hopefully that kind of gives people an understanding of where I come from in terms of my programming. And it's very much based upon a lot of the work by Mike Israetel, who I absolutely love. I'm sure your listeners love as well. I know you've had him on the podcast, and it comes from kind of Mike Stone, and that was who Mike Israetel studied under. So lots of good mics.
Yeah, lots of good mics. Brilliant. Okay, so you're looking at the block periodization method, which I have to say I'm a big fan of as well, because I like the idea that you can obviously really focus on lifting some really heavy shit and putting it back down again. And then when you obviously go to your different phase, like your hypertrophy phase, for example, you're going into a different rep range, and possibly lightening the load. So you're kind of protecting your joints at the same time as well, aren't you?
Mm-hmm. Yes, certainly. So
what would you go on about? What would your normal block be, or would you do that person specific? Because I understand, and I'm a big fan of having a back off week or a deload week. So are you of the same mindset?
Yeah, I certainly use deload weeks. I think that's an element of, if you ever look at any of the good programs out there that you can purchase or try for free online, I can't think of a single one that doesn't have a deload week in there. That's kind of either built in, or there's ways of like tapering. They might call it something else. They might call it like a base week. But I always use those periods of time in which, whether it's volume comes down, volume always comes down. Intensity normally comes down a tad as well. And you just get a huge reduction in fatigue, because we get that build up of fatigue over a course of weeks of training. And that eventually builds up so high that we can't perform, because it masks our performance, and we need to allow that to come down. We need to allow that fatigue to come down so we can let our fitness come through again. And I think as a beginner, like, you can get away with not using the deloads. So I don't use maybe deloads as frequently with beginners. They might come in every like 8 weeks. Whereas for someone more advanced like myself, I tend to take them every 5th week, depending on kind of my training at the time. But they may even come in every 4th week for people who they accumulate so much fatigue so quickly that they have to deload sooner. The way to kind of think about it is, I really like the volume landmarks that Renaissance periodization use, in which they kind of start off a mesocycle, so a month of training, in which you focus on kind of using the minimum you need to progress. and you adapt to this. You come to the maximal adaptive volume, so you slightly increase the amount of volume doing, you slightly increase it, and then you come to the maximal recoverable volume, which is like the most volume you can do, and then you can't do any more. So you need to back off and deload, otherwise you're going to kind of overtrain and injure yourself and not get the reward from your training. So someone who is novice, they have quite a big gap between the minimum they need to grow and the most they can possibly do. So they can kind of travel over multiple weeks or have bigger jumps week to week. But generally, multiple weeks is quite nice, so they can start growing for a bit of a longer period of time. Whereas someone who is quite advanced, like us, like we've been training many years, our minimum that we need is actually already quite high, but the most we can do isn't that much higher. So we actually travel between this kind of period a lot quicker over the week, so we have to deload more frequently. And then when you imagine, you take into account, I know we'll probably come onto it, like nutrition, when you're massing, your actual maximal recoverable volume is higher because you can do much more. So you can actually go without a deload for longer. You've got more nutrients coming in, you've got more carbohydrates filling your training. Whereas when we're dieting, like in contest prep, often people take deloads more frequently, and that's basically because they fatigue quicker. Their maximal recoverable volume that used to be up here has now come down here, so they have to take that deload early. And again, it's just once you kind of have an understanding of your ability to recover from volume, how many kind of sets and that sort of thing that you can recover from, you can actually kind of auto-regulate it to yourself. What I'm not a fan of is programs that are quite static. So I've seen programs in which maybe people call them daily undulating, in which they have like a strength day and then a hypertrophy day, and they're like very specific strength, very specific hypertrophy, and they kind of bash heads, but they don't really progress it week to week. It's kind of like, it's very kind of the change in stimulus week to week is quite level. So then they hardly ever need to deload because they're not really ever working that hard. And I think people very much get put away, like they don't like the thought of a deload week, like training less hard and taking time to recover, until they realize that if they take one, they can work that much harder. Because if you don't need a deload, then are you ever really working hard enough to cause a big enough homeostatic disruption to your body to force it to adapt? So yeah, hopefully I didn't go too far onto a tangent. I don't know, I can't even remember the original question.
It's all right. It was just about taking deload weeks. So yeah, I think we beat that one to death, which was brilliant. One of the things that I just picked up on there was interesting, because I have a client at the moment who is absolutely well against deload weeks, and is basically saying, you know, well, I don't feel like I need a deload week. I feel like I can push more and push more and push more. So realistically, in that case, I'm not going to take one, because if I'm already progressing at such an extent, why should I take a deload week now just because it's programmed into my sheets? Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. What's your viewpoint on that?
So first of all, sounds like a bit of a difficult client, but we always have difficult clients, and you have to take their points into consideration. So they're progressing really well. And if often I will have a pre-programmed deload within someone's program. But if they are progressing really well, maybe they've just come out of a cut and I've just increased their food intake, and it's like, well, we had programmed one in week 5, but you're now adapting to like these volumes so well that we can actually push that deload a week further back. So I think having it pre-planned is a great thing, but you don't have to take it. If you haven't got to the most volume you can do and recover from, then you might as well continue to reap the rewards. You can still push another week. However, I have had it with clients, and it's almost like you have to know your clients, because some of them just think they can just keep pushing. Because I've had it where they're like, yeah, I can definitely progress for another week. I feel absolutely fine. And then they do another week and they're like halfway through the week and all of their performance is down. Like they can't perform as many reps. Their loads on the bar are less. And you're like, well, that's because you actually had hit that maximum recoverable volume, and now you're kind of in it. You're essentially overtrained and you can't progress. So we're going to have to put a deload in now. So sometimes, depending on the client, I will force it and just say, and one of my clients, actually, I love this quote. He said, I viewed taking a deload as taking my medicine, which I really liked, because no one really likes taking medicine. We all like to think we can get away with like get through a headache or a migraine or a cold, but when we take that medicine, we feel so much better. So I think most of the time I try and tell, and I think sometimes it's the terminology. People get really put off by the thought of a deload. But I haven't found a way around that. I mean, you could call it, I know AJ Morris, who's been on the show, calls it a reload. Some people call it a base week, but it's just something you need to do to see the best results possible. Definitely.
I call mine a chill out week.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, chill out week, because obviously, you know, we as bodybuilders, we just go hard and heavy all the time, and you want to hit that failure and you want to feel the DOMs afterwards and everything like that, and you're constantly on it, right? But every now and again, hey, a chick needs a spa day, right? Yeah. And blokes need a spa day to go with their chicks. So it's just like, well, do you know what? Have a chill out week. You're still going to go in and do some fluffy stuff, and you're still going to go in with the mindset of being as intense as you want to, but you're just going to do it a little bit more chill. So I call mine a chill out week, which I kind of like.
I really like that.
So you can steal it if you want to. You don't put it in one of your little, what are they now? They're like images that you're putting on Instagram.
The infographic.
Yeah, I love those. So guys, have a look for those infographics because they are really, really cool. Anyway, going off subject a little bit. Okay, so let's get into the different styles of your periodization then, and let's just have a look for a novice trainer who's just come to you. Let's say that and I want to go focus on females as well, because that's what we are. Not you, but you know. So I'd like to focus a little bit on females. So let's go a novice female just starting out, maybe 23, 24 years old, and she wants to build some lean muscle, obviously, and get toned, lose the body fat and everything that she says from there. So how would you set up her first mesocycle of periodization? Would you start off with the primer phase, as in like the hypertrophy, and then would you go on to the strength phase and then maybe kind of throw in some metabolites? How would you work that?
So it depends how novice we're talking. Okay. So if they have, can they squat? Can they bench? Can they row? Can they do the basic movement patterns?
Yeah, let's say that they've had a personal trainer in the past and they taught them how to do the power lifts.
Okay, so maybe they're just at the point at which periodization is going to become helpful for them, because if someone quite novice, they basically don't need anything clever, fancy. They can just keep doing the boring basic stuff that, well, we call it boring and basic. It's always our bread and butter, but they can keep doing that for a long period of time. So they're probably, someone who's coming to the point at which periodization makes sense for them to start implementing, in which basically it's the way I view it. And I think this is quite a nice analogy is, and especially because, well, you're in the UK, Vicky, but some of the audience hopefully are as well, where we have we go to secondary school and until like year 10. So for like, I can't remember how many years, like 4 years, we focus on every single subject under the sun. We just do them all. Yeah. Then at GCSE, we specialize slightly. We drop history and we do geography. We drop art and do PE. So we can specialize, we do German and not French, something like that. People understand, we're getting rid of some things so we can focus on smaller things so we can learn more. Then once we do GCSEs, we go to A levels. We get rid of some other ones. We just pick 3 subjects. And then when we go to university, we specialize again, because we want to get the best at whatever that subject might be, because we don't have enough kind of capacity to learn loads of subjects in depth. So it's kind of like that with, as you training, as you advance, if you try and focus on too many things at once, you just end up kind of getting a null difference, because you can't provide enough of a stress for the body to adapt to it. So when you're first starting out as a real novice, you can kind of build some strength and hypertrophy at once. Quite simply, as you get to more intermediate, advanced, this is when specialization and being very specific with your training is so important. And that's where the blocks can come in, because it's now, rather than trying to get kind of big and strong and everything at once, you're like, right, I'm going to give my body a specific directed kind of adaptation that it's going to move towards. So this is where I'd probably introduce, if her goal was hypertrophy, so she just wants to get more jacked, then I straight away get her into a hypertrophy mesocycle. And this would then be kind of one hypertrophy mesocycle that would lead to another one, and potentially even 4 kind of total mesocycles, depending on kind of how progress was going, how her nutrition was going alongside it, kind of what her body fat levels were doing in life and everything like that.
Sure.
So for her, I mean, for a general hypertrophy mesocycle, what I really like and what I actually think a lot of people don't think about sometimes when they think about programming for males and females, when you actually start off with the base, kind of the principles, they apply to both males and females. It's exactly the same. There's not really any differences. It's only when you get into like individualization is where the differences come in. So that's much later. And you can basically, by auto-regulating your training, which is something that I probably try and get this person to move towards because it's a part of periodization I think is really important. So they understand rate of perceived exertion. They know when they're nearing failure. They know when they're kind of far away from failure, because then we can auto-regulate kind of their loads via that. So they know how much kind of weight they should have on the bar to hit a certain rep range, because generally females can kind of do a lot more reps with heavy loads that you wouldn't expect it. So like 90% of your 1 rep max for a man would be like a 3 rep max. For a female, they might like get 5 reps or something, or 6, something like you just be like, what? And then their 1 rep max is like 5 kilos more. And you're like, oh, I thought like predicted you should be able to do way more. And this is where kind of auto-regulation can really help, or auto-regulation even.
Auto-regulation, yeah.
And then the same with kind of looking at how fatigued they are, like when they're coming in and reporting to you on a weekly basis, how their performance is going, because then you can auto-regulate their volume and progress. Like maybe a female, generally they can take more volume. So maybe they can actually add an additional 2-3 sets per muscle group each week, because they just keep adapting. They can just absorb so much volume, and their maximal recoverable volume might be like 30 sets per muscle group on average, whereas a male might be 20 sets. We generally are just unable to use as much volume. So I think, women in general, just and every female client I have, I can just keep chucking volume at them. And I'm like, if that was given to like myself or a male client, they'd start dying. So generally, like for a female hypertrophy phase, they can just take a lot of volume. But I progress it the same way. So I probably have kind of set up maybe a 4-to-1 paradigm of overloading weeks to then a deload. And then the next phase of training would be looking to overload upon that first week from the mesocycle before. I tend to like focus on maybe mostly the 8 to 10 rep range in kind of that first month. And then I move towards like the 10 to 12 rep range. And then I move towards kind of the 12 to 15 with some metabolite training as well, kind of layering each bit on top. And when I say focus, I don't mean that I don't at all do anything lower or higher than that within that mesocycle. It's just focused, like most of the work is done within that rep range. So I might undulate within, but most of it is around that rep range,
Yeah, absolutely. And in regards to exercise selection, are you quite favourable to asking the clients what they like about exercise selections? Or do you just kind of have a look at them, have a look at how they move, how they squat, or, you know, how they bench, and then basically say, right, we're going to focus on these movements and these exercise specifics?
So I think, great question, because I think there will be some people that will just be like, right, you have to squat, you have to bench, you have to deadlift. And those are great movements, but within those, there's so many different variants. And because we're all so different, someone might like, I personally hate front squats. I go out of my way never to do a front squat or overhead press. But some people are just like, right, front squats, I love them. They absolutely demolish my quads. Please, 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 can we program those in? And I might just say, right, I wanted to do a squat here. I had back squat in there, but it's definitely a to and fro conversation with the person. And always giving justification for why I've chosen something. So sometimes I might say like, all right, I want to do a wide grip bench press. And they're like, oh, actually, I want to do dumbbell press or like a machine press. And I might, well, we're using heavier loads right now. We're probably better able to use heavier loads within a barbell than with dumbbells or a machine, which are better suited to kind of lighter reps. So you can kind of not worry about form and things like that. So that's why I've said the barbell. Now, if you still want to use that, then I'll always go with that, because as we know, adherence is the most important thing. And if you don't enjoy your program, if you don't enjoy an exercise, I know if I had front squats programmed 3 times a week, I'm not sure I'd even set foot in the gym. I just like, no, I'm not doing these front squats. I'd probably still go, but regardless, it's definitely important to allow them to have preference, but from a selection of exercises that make sense.
Yeah.
So no like Bozu squats. We're not putting those in a hypertrophy program.
That's so funny. Or like, you know, the overhead shoulder press on a bike.
Oh God, do people even do this?
You know what? Yes. In my gym, every single morning when I'm doing my cardio, there is a guy on the bike and he's there with his shoulder raises and his dumbbells. I'm like, oh dear God. Okay, fine, fair enough, never mind. So yeah, so maybe not the best selection of exercises to do on a bike. Okay, awesome. So just carrying on with exercise selection, when you were to program a mesocycle to mesocycle, so say 8 to 10, first of all, you've got your bench press. And then when you go on to your 10 to 12, would you then swap that bench press for something else? Or would you just go back to the original weight, maybe plus 5 kilos from their starting weight on a bench press, and then carry on from there with the same exercise selection?
So my train of thought has really changed in recent years on this. I was always under the impression you should have core lifts. So by core lifts, I mean like a bench that never changes, a squat that never changes, a deadlift that never changes. You've got them in there all the time, all year round. Now, after being exposed to different views on it and trying it myself and doing it with other clients, I found that rotating exercises, not by a huge amount, but just slight tweaks, has had huge benefits. And essentially, it's kind of exercise variation, and it's named delete and replace, kind of is the kind of textbook kind of version of it. So when I have someone with an exercise, I will kind of, for most people, I like to change it after, if they're kind of advanced, so they know how to do the lifts, they're not like relearning a squat every single time they go to squat, or relearning how to bench press, then I like to change it every mesocycle by a small amount. So that might be a kind of standard powerlifting bench press, and then the next mesocycle they go to a close grip, so just moving in their hands very slightly, or they might move from like a low bar squat to then a high bar squat to then a close stance high bar squat. So just slight adjustments that are really small tweaks, because I find there's a fine line between, you need to allow the exercise to be there long enough to see some directed adaptation, it's called. So you need to allow it there long enough so you can actually get better at it, and you don't be changing it so often that literally you're confused. So like muscle confusion, which is like every week you wouldn't want to change from a squat to like a leg press and then back to a front squat. Like your body wouldn't be able to actually adapt with it and progress with it. But there becomes a point at which adaptive resistance settles in. So this is the body, just like we know with diets, like the longer you diet, you stay on the same calorie intake, the body just adapts to it, and so you have to reduce calories further. Same with like a bench press. There's going to be a period of time at which, once you kind of, maybe 2 mesocycles, progress is just starting to stall. It's getting difficult. Maybe even you're getting some niggles in some of the areas that style of bench really uses. So by changing the exercise, you get round this kind of staleness. You also prevent injury building up, and you can kind of, again, build towards a new exercise. So yeah, that you get kind of really nice movement between mesocycles. So yeah, I do like to change an exercise for someone who's more advanced every mesocycle. If they want to hold on to it, I like it there for maybe 2 to 3, but much more than that, I'm kind of thinking it will make sense to rotate something else in. And sometimes it doesn't even need, especially for powerlifters, if we're talking about powerlifters ever, it would just be put on the back burner. So it might be, right, we were squatting first before, that was like our priority lift. Now we're going to put squats in the program, but on less volume, and we're going to focus on leg press and really hammer our quads and get like a lot of volume through leg press. So yeah, there's loads of ways to do it, but I don't think people have to squat, bench, deadlift year round, because I think it can cause some problems. I've certainly, when I was low bar squatting all the time, just my shoulders and elbows and things like this they just started to feel really kind of wrecked. And it wasn't much fun.
No, that's it. No, I really like that as well. So just smaller tweaks and just swapping it. And you don't even need to swap out every single exercise and do a whole new program. You can just swap out like you said, the main lifts, maybe swap a deadlift for a rack pull or something along those lines, you know, and just keeping things a little bit more interesting for clients, because I do get that quite a lot as well. Oh God, I'm bored, you know, I'm bored of the going back and starting again and that kind of thing. So it's keeping some things interesting, isn't it? All right, excellent. So let's just have a quick 2 more minutes on this one, and then we'll move on to some nutrition, I think. So when would you think it would be best then for this woman to go on to her strength building phase? And obviously, if she's obviously more interested in getting jacked, you would go maybe 3 or 4 mesocycles hypertrophy. Would you then only do maybe one mesocycle of a strength phase?
Yeah, so if your main goal is just building muscle, then really from what I know and I've read, you don't need longer than maybe a month at kind of just maintaining, just to bring down fatigue long enough so that you can kind of be receptive to volume again. Because effectively you've kind of, you've layered upon everything. You've now on that kind of mesocycle where you've got those metabolites in there as well as your kind of traditional heavy hypertrophy work. You're kind of like, I have nowhere to go. I can't possibly progress from here. So you then come down, kind of allow for a low volume phase where you do just lift heavy shit, which is quite fun now and then to do as well. Yeah. So yeah, after kind of 3 to 4 mesocycles, so maybe 3 to 4 months of hypertrophy style work, drop in a month of kind of higher volume work, in which, the volume's much reduced. So you might be doing kind of 50 to 60% less volume than you were in terms of number of sets of your hypertrophy work, but it's much heavier. So your actual rest periods and things like this are much higher, but you do less exercises as well. So you might chop out some of kind of the really fluffy movements, the really isolation-y movements, and just focus on like big barbell lifts. It's nice from a physiological standpoint, kind of you recover a lot of kind of fatigue because volume's nice and low, but also psychologically, it's really kind of a relief because like drop sets, supersets, all of these kind of metabolite techniques, they get tough. So it's nice to have a period of time where you can kind of refuel the fire for higher volume training again, because when you come back into it, you're like, yes, this feels amazing. So yeah, that's kind of how I probably structure that.
Lovely. Absolutely love it. Okay, cool. And I just want to clarify as well for everyone who's listening as well, this was just an example that I plucked out of thin air. This is not the kind of cycles that we would recommend for absolutely everybody. And it's all individualized and it should be personalized. So instead of everybody just kind of rushing out to do a 4-month block periodization of hypertrophy and then swapping down into strength phases, just stop and take a moment and maybe speak to somebody about your goals previously to that. Okay, so let's move on to nutrition then, Steve, because a lot of people, again, just kind of go with one linear direction of nutrition. And I love the fact that you had a marination phase in the middle of your comp prep, which everybody kind of went, Jesus Christ, what the hell are you doing? You know, you've still got to lose fat and all the rest of it. And you're like, okay, now I've got to do this marination phase. My fats have come up and it's really difficult. So just explain a little bit more about how you would periodize nutritional concepts then.
So yeah, completely. I think your nutrition and training should go hand in hand. So when you are kind of doing your hypertrophy training, which is kind of muscle stimulating training, it makes sense at that time to either be in a calorie surplus or a calorie deficit, because you are trying to stimulate muscle growth in both those scenarios. You want kind of either maximal muscle growth because you're kind of trying to use all those calories, or you're trying to maximally retain all the muscle you've got. So to produce a maximal response for growth is the best way to retain. And then when you're in your kind of periods of time where you're trying to actually just allow fatigue to come down, that's when you bring calories just to maintenance, because you've not got enough volume there to potentiate muscle growth. And if you're in a calorie deficit, then you're doing too little volume to actually hold on to all your muscle. So yeah, the lower strength blocks of those periods of time, it makes sense to hold on to just what you've got, maintain. If you did try to gain, then yeah, you probably just gain fat tissue for the most part. Not saying that you can't gain muscle on kind of higher intensities, but because they're high intensity, the volume's just capped so low that it just doesn't make sense. And then because the volume's so low, you're not providing the best stimulus for growth. You do risk muscle loss during that time. The only time you could potentially do like a small calorie deficit, it just wouldn't be recommended. So yeah, that's how I kind of put those two together. So hypertrophy, massing or cutting, and then strength is just maintained for that period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, what is a very interesting question and something that I thought of a little while ago, which I really wanted to bring up with you, when you do your maintenance or your marination phase, and you're doing your big strength work as well, you say bring your calories back up to maintenance. Now, is that going to be your original maintenance before you started losing weight in your deficit, or your brand new adaptive maintenance?
So it's always adaptive maintenance.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's important to take into consideration, because as well, hopefully the listeners know, like your metabolic rate is made up of your resting metabolic rate. So then you've got also calories coming from your thermic effect of activity. You've got your NEAT, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and then you've got the thermic effect of feeding as well. But in reality, when you're dieting, you've lost weight, so your resting metabolic rate will come down because there's less of you to hold on to. And then potentially your NEAT has come down just because the body's adapted, it's ramped that down. And then also, well, you're eating less. That one we can kind of, it's a very small component of your metabolism anyway. So once you are down at that point, kind of looking towards what's your average weight loss been over the last month. Maybe you lost 4 pounds, which would be great. So you're losing about a pound a week, which would equate to around a 500 calorie deficit. So you could probably bump your calories up by 500, thinking that's kind of a good rough idea of where my maintenance is going to be. Now, once you start getting into ramp, like you add that 500 calories, as your body goes through this and it has more food, it starts adapting up as well. So you might even find that you can kind of give it 500 more, then you're like, oh, I can add another 100, another 100. And then by the end of that kind of period of maintenance, you're back up close to where your maintenance was before, which is really nice. And then you can start dieting again. So you've kind of like refueled the tank, so you can actually be in a healthy position to start losing fat again. So yeah, that's kind of where I'd go with that.
Yeah, I really like that one as well. So a lot of people were asking me these questions, and I said, well, it should be your adaptive metabolism rate or your adapted calories now. Because if you just go straight back up to your maintenance, like my maintenance in my off season was like 3,500 calories.
Wow.
I know, yeah, right. And I'm tiny. I'm just a bit of a freak of nature, to be fair. But if I just went like from here to 3,500 calories for 4 weeks, my God, and then with that low volume strength training as well, you could just imagine I'd just blow up. It would just be ridiculous. So, I'd probably have to go back up to maybe about 2,000 calories for my maintenance now, and then do some heavy strength training and things. But so yeah, so please take that into account as well, guys, So final thing then in regards to nutrition, I just want to touch a little bit on supplementation. Would you advise anybody to take different supplements as well in different mesocycles throughout the year, or would you just kind of go with the main supplements all year round?
So yeah, supplementation is always, like we know, it's that cherry on the top of the already brilliant tasting sundae of kind of good nutrition and macros and all of that stuff. So yeah, in general, it's always a recommendation. I never tell my clients like, you have to take this or you have to take that. I'm sure you're exactly the same. And hopefully people are realizing, I mean, they are what they say on the tin, and I don't know why people don't really get it, but I didn't get it when I started either. I thought supplements were the be all and end all. But yeah, my recommendations for supplementation doesn't change too much. I have the bog standard kind of ones we know work year round. The only ones that might change is things like when you're dieting, maybe a multivitamin is something that you should definitely start taking. Whereas in the off season, when you're eating plenty, you might be like, I'm actually eating a really well-rounded diet. I don't need this kind of multivitamin. And then apart from that, I think stuff like creatine is just something I would supplement with year round. I have dabbled with the idea of having slightly more creatine when you're dieting. This is kind of to do with the fact that you're on lower glycogen. I mean, you have lower glycogen stores, and kind of creatine phosphate is another way to kind of get some energy. It's another energy source. So by having that even more topped out potentially, because it's going to be less topped out when your glycogen depleted. Something I've dabbled with. I'm not sure if there'd ever be any evidence behind that. It's just a cheap supplement that I've used. Beta alanine I've gone away from. I used to recommend it, but after kind of having discussions with Mike where he kind of made me really rethink whether that was like applicable to a bodybuilder, it made me think that it probably isn't helpful for someone who isn't after endurance adaptations. We're actually after kind of things that don't relate to that. And then omega-3s, basically, if you don't take in fatty fish, it's good to have some omega-3 tablets year round. But again, if you are kind of a bit lazy with it, then during your dieting phase, this becomes really important when you're on lower fats, getting these essential fatty acids in. But yeah, apart from kind of those ones, I don't think there's anything I particularly say you should definitely be taking. I have been taking HMB before my main lifting sessions. It's kind of like I've got the money. I really, really like bodybuilding. I really want to retain as much muscle as possible. So I take 3 grams before my main kind of weightlifting sessions during the day. But apart from that, and like casein, again, I don't really call protein powders a supplement necessarily. I kind of just see them as food. Yeah. I do take, I like having kind of some casein before bed, and I like having I use whey protein as like just a real replacement essentially kind of during the day. But I actually have been you made me think of something, dabbling with intra workouts a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that question. So go on there. Are you doing the cyclic dextrins and cluster dextrins?
I haven't been, mainly because I haven't seen anything that's made me think that the cost to benefit is there. Like digestion rates between that and anything that's just sugary is so minimal. So if I don't get any gastric distress from I just get a little Lucozade basically that's so cheap. It's just glucose, which digests insanely quick anyway. So I haven't seen anything to convince me that I should be taking something like cyclic dextrin. I know a lot of people are proponents of that, but yeah, my intra workout at the moment is basically 30 grams of carbs from that sports drink, and then I take 10 grams of whey isolate with that. It's just kind of, for me, because I'm training twice a day at the moment, it definitely makes sense, because I need to kind of start recovering as soon as I started training so that I'm maximally recovered for my evening session. But even if you have especially at the end of your mesocycles, in those overreaching weeks, I've definitely recommended it to clients, even if they're massing and they're on loads of calories. And in fact, it kind of helps when they're on that many calories. But after an hour of training, sometimes their training is 2 hours long. Yeah. You almost do kind of need that carb, and you need that replenishment during the session. And sometimes it might just be psychological, like a placebo of the fact you've got a tasty drink and it's got carbs in it. You're like, right, I'm going to push harder now. But even through my cut, when I'm on 2,200 calories, I still want that 100 calories on that intra workout shake, because I know it's got so many benefits. I feel because I know there's been a lot of hatred, nutrient time is a very small thing. And I wouldn't say hatred, but I have seen the haterade from Alan Aragon and stuff. And I think that has a lot of credence, but there is some special cases where that intra workout shake can kind of be quite a game changer for people.
Yeah, definitely. I was speaking to AJ actually about this. I think he said it about the placebo effect on his podcast as well. And even though, I think he literally takes about 15 grams of carbs, which is
oh, really?
Yeah, what is that? 15 grams of carbs and some BCAAs or something. But it's like he said, it's the placebo effect, to the point where every time he reaches down and has that sip of a drink, he knows that he's going to pick up those 30-kilo dumbbells and bench press the hell out of them. Mm-hmm. which is wicked, and hey, if that is the only thing, or if that is going to give you the extra edge to get those reps out when you're in a deficit, then why the hell not?
Yeah, completely.
Take the 15 grams of carbs, or have a pixie stick, or whatever it is that you're going to have intra workout. I'm personally not a fan of intra workout, purely for the simple fact that I did have it at the beginning of my cutting phase. And it gave me horrendous heartburn. I just felt that I had to drink all of this water, because you've got to have it in such a huge amount of water as well, or this cyclic dextrin. And I just didn't feel like it gave me any kind of edge at all. And every time I put my belt on to do my deadlifts and things, it just kept on getting tighter and tighter throughout it. So, do you know what? Just take that out. I'm just not going to enjoy it at all. So I'm not a big fan of it. So again, guys, another point to take home with supplementation: just because somebody's written it in a book doesn't mean that it's going to be applicable to you. So again, it's trial and error of what works for you will not work for somebody else. Definitely being on 3,500 calories in your off season works for me, might not work for anybody else who's 5'1" and a tiny person. So again, just don't go for that kind of thing. Okay, cool. So I think we've covered quite a lot there, haven't we, Steve? So
hopefully people have gotten some good value from that.
yeah, I reckon so. So is there anything else that you would advise anybody to do in regards to periodization? Actually, before we go, just one other question. Obviously, I know that we've spoken a lot about bodybuilding and powerlifters, but what about periodization on how would you start off somebody who's just a general population fat loss client? Mm-hmm. Would you go with things like all over body training for mesocycles and then split it up into body parts? Or would you always go on with maybe like a push-pull leg split and then go on to body parts again?
So I would, I mean, if they're quite new and they're just general fat loss, then I think full body workouts, you can't really go wrong. What I think you can do is rather than kind of, I think a lot of people have these full body workouts and they're like 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 10, every single kind of the bench, the row, the deadlift and the squat, maybe that's their full body program and every day. Whereas I think they can slightly enhance that by having a slight emphasis to each. So maybe one of them you emphasize pushing movements, one of them you emphasize pulling movements, and then you just have like an A and B that you can rotate, because this just helps kind of just psychologically, like knowing you've always got like loads of all of them, but knowing you can focus on like 2 movements and then focus on 2 movements and have the other ones kind of still there but on the back burner, I think can really help. But again, still focusing on that hypertrophy style training, so still within that kind of higher volume rep range, and align that with their diet.
Yeah, definitely. I'm in complete agreement as well. I do find it really irritating when people are newbies, for example, and then they get these fat loss clients and they treat them as bodybuilders, and it's just like, you know what, you just can't do that. You know, it is all individualized and personalized, and it is called personal training and personal coaching for a reason. So, you know, guys, if somebody just gives you a bodybuilding.com workout, go and find someone else, please. Okay, so I think that's about it then for me and Steve today. So, Steve, where can everybody follow you? Where can they find you? And where can they find those awesome infographics that I love so much?
So, thank you so much. And if people want to reach out to us, basically we Revive Stronger on any of things. So like on Instagram, we're Revive Stronger. On Facebook, again, Revive Stronger. So if they just go revivestronger.com, they'll probably find the podcast there, and then that will link out to various things. But they can't go wrong if they just search into Google Revive Stronger Steve Hall or something along those lines. That'd be fantastic. Yeah,
and they'll also find a picture of you ridiculously shredded in a crab pose, which is just like phenomenal. So I love that.
I'm hoping to get some better ones.
Yeah, you'll get there 4 weeks time and we'll get those shredded glutes out, eh? You'll have it backwards. All right, awesome. Right, well, that's it from me, guys. Steve, thanks ever so much for giving me your time today. I will put all of his contact details on the socials and obviously underneath here on the YouTube video. Guys, just a cheeky request, if you could, please leave us a review on iTunes, because that will help us crawl up the ladder. The same thing goes for the Revive Stronger podcast as well. Please leave them a review, because they've got some awesome stuff on there and some awesome guests, especially when Mike Israel comes on. I just can't wait for his next Q&As every time you mention him. It's phenomenal what that guy knows. And he doesn't even prepare for any of the questions, does he? He just sits there and he's like, yeah, I'll just knock them out of the park, which he does, with amazing metaphors as well. Yeah. Loves the metaphors. So yeah, okay then, guys, so that's it from me. Thank you ever so much, and I will see you next week on the next episode of Don't Fear the Weight. Cheers, guys. See you, Steve.
Cheers.
And that's it. We're out, dude.
Awesome.
That was really good.
Oh, good.
Yeah, really good. I really enjoyed that. I loved how we managed to get everything in there, including supplementation, because I was like, well, do I ask the question? Do I not? But yeah, I'm really glad that we did that. Really, really glad. So I'll get it all up. I'll get all the funky music and the graphic up and, the poster and everything like that. And then I'll tag you in that. And if you're happy to share it on your platforms.
Awesome, yeah.
That would be wicked.
Yeah, for sure. No, thank you so much. And I just thank you again for having me on. And I wish you all the best for your show this weekend. It's going to be, I'm super excited to see you and AJ kind of put it all to the floor. So.
Oh, it's going to be horrendous, isn't it? We've already basically said when me and AJ get together, we're just ludicrous. It's quite funny. And he's already said, right, meet me at the hotel. We'll walk down together. And it's like the last time we did this for the British finals and we went to Liverpool Echo Arena together. Oh my God, it was just carnage. It was hilarious. But it was carnage. So yeah, I've got him a little Starbucks cup, because last year or in 2015, he always had this minging, horrible Starbucks cup.
Oh, really?
That he just kept on topping up with water and the same straw and everything. And it was like, oh, mate, so I've never let him live that down. So I've got him a new one just to kind of say, I remember.
Is this your only show that you're doing now, or have you got other ones?
This is my qualifier. So
cool.
So this is just the qualifier. So I'm hoping if I can qualify from this one in Birmingham, there's the British finals. And then a week before the British finals, I have been invited to pose at the UK DFBA.
Oh, cool.
So I don't know whether I do that one or not. It does depend on how I'm looking, obviously, like a week out, because I don't want to peak twice.
No.
So I might decide to do it, I might not. But I was invited by Lee to do the physique class.
That the 30th?
Yes. Yeah.
That's my main show.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, I might have to do it then. Just to kind of stand backstage with you, for the IG stories.
Yeah.
So we'll have a look anyway. We'll have a look. Are you planning on coming up and watching any shows this year?
I'm only at the MPA. Well, only the ones I'm doing at the moment. It's just logistics and timing, and kind of when all the shows are together, you're kind of like, but I want to be in control of all the variables and stuff. But I know AJ's at the MPA that I'm doing, the Southeast.
Yeah,
so he's going to be there anyway. I don't have actually. I don't think I have any competitors at these shows. So yeah, it's kind of, I haven't got a big kind of reason that I have to be there.
Yeah, sure. No, it's understandable, and we're all ridiculously busy as well at the minute, aren't we? So, which is good. It's always nice to be busy.
Yeah.
All right, cool beans, dude. Right, well, thanks ever so much again, and I'll send you a quick message when everything's uploaded, and it normally gets released on a Sunday, so yours will be out this Sunday. Okay, darling.
Perfect. Sweet.
All right,
cheers, Vicky.
Have a good day. See you later.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.